how the people are doing. So, the Pixel 9 Pro XL. Many might already believe that this might be one of the absolute best photography cameras. I do not share that opinion, not by a long shot, because there are certain fundamental areas where it is severely lacking, unfathomably so. It's not been fixed, it's not been addressed in the slightest, and without that, I don't think it's even close to being in the top 3, in my personal experience at least. Obviously, it is my opinion after all, but still, like, you'll notice exactly what the hell I'm talking about soon enough. But the iPhone 16 Pro, see now this thing is a different kind of beast, in a manner of speaking, because the way it works is that the new iPhone, the iPhone 16 Pro, it has had a lot of changes, and Apple has made a lot of decisions towards consumer choice. Sounds crazy, but it is true, and that is why I think it's my personal favorite iPhone camera, and that should mean a lot, because I've never liked iPhone cameras, almost ever. To this very day, I've never really enjoyed using iPhones and their cameras in general, because they've always felt very restrictive, and that has changed, which is, as I've mentioned, a big deal. But there are also a lot of issues, and you'll see a lot of those issues in this very comparison. I was basically able to be lucky in the regard, because I managed to get a lot of samples with these issues. So jumping right in with the main cameras, of course, and one of the things you'll start noticing soon enough is that the Pixel 9 Pro XL, it has fantastic color science, but on the iPhone you may have noticed as well, there is a ton of contrast. It is unlike any other iPhone image that you may have seen. That's because I'm using the natural photographic style. Now, you can tweak it manually as much as you want, and it's got a very good customizable system in place with the photographic styles. However, I decided to just keep it in the natural color profile because, it's a little bit more standardized, but there are certain issues that you may have started noticing. You see, a lot of these shots, they were taken in warm lighting, warm sunset lighting, and that's where the iPhone struggles. It still struggles, that's the thing. Like, I think I've seen this issue with cooling off warm tones and just giving you overly neutralized images where you want a lot of warmth, like you want the warm sunlight to be present. And I've seen this ever since, I believe, the iPhone 13 Pro. Maybe the 14 Pro, I'm not entirely certain, but yeah, one of those, definitely. Ever since then, this issue has not been resolved to this very date. That's a little sad, but to be completely honest, the Pixel isn't without fault either. There are various images where I noticed the shadows being a little too crushed, maybe just in general lacking contrast. There's also very few images where the warmth is not properly represented. Overly neutralized, very similar to what the iPhone's been doing, as you can tell. But then this shot, this is particularly bad because, as you can probably tell, I don't know what the hell is going on with the pavement color. Obviously, it's how it looked on the Pixel. That's the natural color. And then, of course, backlit. Now, in this particular case, actually, I think the iPhone's doing a really good job. It is bringing out more shadow detail, and although true that the Pixel is giving us the right white balance, or the accurate color tones and the accurate warmth that should have been present in the scene and is being completely removed by the iPhone as expected, but with the shadow detail at least, it is definitely doing a nice job. In this case, however, we have a problem once again. The blues, just look at how much blue is in the shadows. If that doesn't look unnatural and unrealistic, I don't know what does, because the Pixel's color science, there's a reason I find that to be one of my absolute favorites. It'll mess up sometimes, for sure, nothing is perfect, but the iPhone messes up way too much, and a lot of these shots, a lot of these sunset shots, which I enjoy taking a lot, the fact that we can't really get proper accurate color tones and proper accurate warmth, it really bothers me. And of course, before we go any further, I do have something that I want to show you guys. So this right here, this is the Lytmi open ear headphones. Now, there's a very good reason that I don't use earbuds of any kind almost ever, because here's the deal. Unless the earbud is very specifically designed to have a very specifically good fit for my ears, it just doesn't stay in there. And like, I faced this weird issue ever since my birth. I don't know what in the absolute hell is wrong with my ears, but it's been the case. So I've never even bought new earbuds for like 3 years now. But you see, with the open ear design on this thing, it's basically perfect. It's made for people like me, and I know I'm not alone. Now obviously, the whole point of these earbuds is to be used outdoors. And that's basically the way I like to use it when I'm outdoors. Being able to hear my surroundings is important, so consider that. Along with the fact that these have one of the most secure fit that I've ever used. But that's not all though. The sound quality is also incredible. It's definitely beyond my expectations because I didn't expect them to sound as nice or as full, most definitely. So with a lot of pleasure, I can actually recommend this to you guys with an open heart because this is a really good product, especially at just $40. The advantages that you have overall, it basically outweighs any and all cons that you could even think of. So with that said, most definitely check these babies out because the link will be in the description, and I'll also put it in the comments because why the hell not. And then of course we have the ultra-wide camera. So one thing that I have noticed is that the warm tones are slightly, just a pinch better preserved on the iPhone with the ultra-wide as opposed to the main camera. So for some odd reason, the ultra-wide camera is better fine-tuned, I guess, to preserve the right and accurate color tones as opposed to the main camera, which is weird at least. But there is another thing I've noticed. You see, the iPhone can have a tendency to increase its details, like it'll boost the clarity and the sharpness, while the Pixel, which is known to do that, is not doing as much of it, at least. But then there's shot. Oh, hallelujah. This is both horrible and stupendous at the same time. I'm telling you, this, I got the exact same result across the 3 images that I took with the iPhone. The 3 images that were taken of me by the iPhone. I don't know why it messed up so bad. It's not even backlit. It's just a regular shot, and it just needed regular dynamic range control, like the Pixel is doing. But you see, these inconsistencies, they're exactly that, inconsistencies. Because now, even though, yes, the Pixel is still producing better shadow detail, no surprise there, it tends to do that. It has very good dynamic range after all. The iPhone is at least giving you a usable image. It doesn't look like a silhouette, unlike the previous shot at least. And then of course, macro. Now both of these phones do have really nice macro shots, as you can probably tell, but the iPhone does appear to be capable of getting a touch closer as opposed to the Pixel. It is a very minor difference, but it is still a difference nonetheless. And now then for the fabled 2x sensor crop. In this case, I'm not really going to zoom in because we can't even see the details. I just wanted to showcase this as another proof of inconsistency on the iPhone, because it really is quite something when it just stops working on the iPhone, the HDR processing that is. However, we will check out details on this particular shot because in this case, there aren't any weird inconsistencies with the shadows being totally and utterly crushed. The Pixel is giving us a relatively cleaner image. It is more processed, but I can also see a good amount of artifacting, especially if you look at the text. You can very clearly see the artifacting, maybe because of noise reduction or whatever. But the iPhone, on the other hand, it does give you a more grainy and noisy image, but overall it is actually a little bit more natural as opposed to the artifacty text that we're getting on the Pixel. Moving on to 5x now, the contrast on the iPhone. I'm really liking that. I do think that it's maybe a touch too desaturated as opposed to the Pixel, but the contrast is, it's looking juicy. But as you can probably tell, it's the boost in contrast and clarity that's making it appear as though it has more detail, but that is not the case in reality, because when you just crop all the way into 500%, it's very obvious that both the Pixel and the iPhone have similar levels of detail, but the iPhone is processing the image well enough to the point that you don't get as much noise or grain. Hell, if anything at all, I'm seeing more artifacting on the iPhone, and that's not a good sign given that it's not really processing much of anything at all. And then of course a 10x zoom shot. Now, the reason I took this is not to test a zoom or anything, but because it's sunset, I got a Burj Khalifa silhouette, it's a little too tempting to not take it. But here's the deal. I think the iPhone is most definitely giving us way too much grain, and that's been a theme. The real issue where the iPhone really just catastrophically destroys the entire image is with the colors and the white balance and the cooling off of the entire image as a whole. Not exactly what I wanted, right? Especially when I'm trying to capture the bloody sunset. But anywho, let's move on to high resolution now. See, this is where things might start to get a little bit more interesting, because the high-res performance on the iPhone has been fairly good, at least in terms of the comparisons that I've already made. You can check those out if you want, links are in the description. But zooming in all the way or cropping in to 500%, and yeah, there's definitely more detail happening on the iPhone. It's not a night and day difference, but there's definitely enough of a difference. Especially with high res, the iPhone is much more capable of bringing out proper levels of detail. But then the ultrawide camera, see, any reasonable person on this planet would just assume that if the main camera is capable of producing such a nice shot, the ultrawide with the new sensor on the iPhone should be capable of doing the same, right? Well, then we would all be wrong, because I had a similar assumption. The Pixel's ultrawide camera is able to capture a lot of detail like that. That looks good. That looks stunning in terms of the details that is able to preserve. Did Google improve the detail preservation? Because I don't recall it being as good as this. Anywho, with a telephoto, the 5x that is on both phones, we can actually take a high-res shot on the Pixel 9 Pro XL. Now, the iPhone doesn't actually have a high-res camera on the telephoto for some very odd reason. And well, as expected, without the high-res supporting it, you can't really get the proper high detail result that we were expecting, I guess. Anywho, let's move on to selfies, and just like with some of the main camera shots where you had a human subject, that is to say me, present in the shot, you would have noticed it, right? The iPhone, which tends to have a problem with cooling off images way too much, it tends to preserve a lot of the warmth, maybe a bit too much sometimes. Like in this case, I would say it's going a little too far with the red and the orange hues that we're getting. It wasn't that warm, to say the least. And another little advantage that the Pixel has, at least in my opinion, is that it is way wider as opposed to the iPhone. And that, I think wider selfies just look so much nicer, because they're farther apart from the subject. It just looks so much better to my eyes. So definitely the Pixel will get my preference for that. But without question, one thing that is very impressive over here is that the iPhone's dynamic range, it is way better than I would have expected, especially based on the performance that we saw with the dynamic range issues with the main and the ultrawide cameras. This is by far the best image that I've seen with the backlit shot. And look, portrait selfies, it's basically the same story. If anything at all, I think in portrait selfies specifically, the Pixel does appear to be neutralizing the warmth as opposed to the iPhone, which is maybe going a little too crazy with the orange, sure, but it's still preserving more of the natural warmth. And it's a very similar case with the backlit selfie portrait as well. You see, I'm genuinely surprised as to how well the iPhone's able to keep up here, because I would have expected a silhouette, but that's obviously not the case. It's really well balanced. The Pixel is actually the one that's desaturating slightly over here. And then finally we have night selfies. Look, here's the deal. I don't think either of these are particularly good for night selfies, especially given the fact that I took these in fairly well-lit situation. If you're thinking I'm on a ship, well, that's because I am. Secondly, the iPhone has a very bad tendency of using the damn flash. You can't turn it off, it doesn't matter, and the whole point of using night mode is to avoid using a flash and making it look all superficial and artificial. Well, that's basically what the iPhone does, so I don't really see the point of night selfies. Now moving on, however, to portraits. Now, here's the deal. I'm gonna be very honest over here. The Pixel 9 Pro XL sucks absolute balls with portraits. It's just the way it is. It's been the case ever since a few generations, I think, for the Pixel. And it's one of those issues that for some odd reason never gets resolved. So even though the iPhone, you'll notice soon enough, it has its problems, especially with the backlit shot. It does have its problems. It might crush shadows, sure. But more often than not, you'll still manage to get a significantly better shot as opposed to anything and everything the Pixel can produce in terms of portraits specifically. Even the edge detection tends to be absolutely horrendous on the Pixel. On top of that, you're not actually using optical zoom on the Pixel, because the zoom range for the Pixel's portraits is 1.5x to 3x. So you can't use the main camera, or you have to crop in on the main camera, and you don't even get to utilize a 5x telephoto portrait, which would make so much sense, right? To use it as a portrait mode camera, but you can't. But then night portraits, this is the exception to the rule over here, because for some odd reason, the Pixel's night portraits work out fairly nice. I mean, the iPhone looks nice, it looks very natural in terms of the lighting conditions, but the Pixel is not far off. It is producing very nice levels of detail, it is giving you a good amount of contrast. Yeah, the face looks a little flat, obviously, but it's still a very nice shot as opposed to whatever the hell it was doing previously. However, the night mode, the regular night mode, now see, this is where I think the Pixel once again is going to pull ahead slightly, because it does produce some fantastic results. The iPhone is good, especially with the main camera. It can be very nice, Like the gradients in the sky, the overall look of nighttime is maintained really well. The details obviously are stunning, but it is with the ultrawide camera where the iPhone kind of screws itself, because it tends to go a little too far with maybe trying to maintain the nighttime look and basically crushing every and all shadows. Also, the sky tends to look just weird. There's just very awkward gradient, or the lack thereof of a proper gradient, as opposed to the Pixel 9 Pro XL, which is still by far producing fantastic results. As you can probably tell, it can produce much nicer looking ultra wide night mode shots, which I think play a massive role when you're taking night mode, because ultra wide night mode shots can look stunning if taken with the right camera. But look, to be fair, it's not like the iPhone will always produce horrible results. Like this particular shot, I actually really like how the iPhone looks. It's got the right kind of warmth in the scene, as opposed to the Pixel, which is completely neutralizing it entirely. And also, the way it is kind of crushing the shadows, it doesn't look horrible. It looks very realistic in terms of the exposure and the fact that it was taken at night. The night sky also looks really nice. So yes, it may be a little too heavy-handed with the contrast here, but it is producing a nice shot. However, it's not consistent. That's the entire issue. Then of course, we have 2x at night. You see, sensor crops, they always tend to suffer at night. And given the fact that the Pixel was pulling ahead during daytime shots, it may or may not actually pan out at night. So zooming all the way in, I don't think either is performing particularly well, but most definitely the Pixel is having a lot more sharpening artifacts and haloing, and it doesn't look as nice or organic as the iPhone, which, yes, it doesn't have more detail, but it doesn't have as much sharpening going on either. Then of course 5x. Now 5x is usually interesting because more often than not, phones will tend to switch between using the main camera for their 5x zoom, or basically cropping into 5x from the main camera, or sometimes utilizing the 5x camera by itself. Depending on the lighting situation, it can vary a little. I'm not really certain which is being used in this case, because there have also been instances when, even though the 5x telephoto camera has actually been utilized, the shot isn't processed well enough. And in this case, you know what, I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume that neither of these cameras are utilizing that 5x telephoto zoom. So that's unfortunate, obviously, but you know, these are just the results you're going to get at night. These weren't particularly difficult in terms of lighting, as you can probably tell. And in terms of detail, I'd say, once again, the iPhone just has less processing going on, so by default that gets a little bit of my preference, but it's not particularly blockbuster either. And so with that said, we have reached the end of this comparison. So the issues, I think they're blatantly obvious on the iPhone, right? It's fantastic that we have so many options now, with just fine-tuning the exact kind of colors that you want with your photos. But the problem is that it's not consistent. That's the real issue here. The dynamic range problem still exists. We still don't have a proper fix to the white balance issues, where it'll just wash out all the warmth and just make it look so sterile and neutralized, and just not as nice as I would have expected, especially when I'm taking a warm lit shot. I want all the warmth to be present in there. What's the point otherwise, right? The Pixel, on the other hand, it does have a much more consistent color science. It definitely has more color accuracy and much better white balance in terms of giving us the accurate warmth and the colors in the scene. But it also has problems. Like with the selfies, you know, we saw some desaturation, but the biggest issue above everything else, like, yeah, the inconsistencies on the Pixel are minor as opposed to what the iPhone has, but the problem on the Pixel are just those absolutely pathetic portraits that you can have, which makes no sense. It's so dependent on software. Why are portrait modes the weak point of the Pixel? I can understand having hardware as a weak point on the Pixel, but why portrait mode? I don't know. It's just the way it's been for a very long time, and I don't know if Google's ever gonna fix this. But, well, with that said, now you know exactly the issues that surround both of these devices. And well, I'll see you guys tomorrow with more, because my personal pick for this would actually be the Pixel, because, you know, I don't really care much about portrait mode, not enough at least. But I think for most people it's gonna be the iPhone because of portrait modes. I'll see you guys tomorrow with more. Cheers.